Hey guys, what's up? My name is Shanwein and today pag-usapan nga natin tong isang article galing sa isang Bangkok-based journalist. No? Isa siya as he claims na mamaya ipapakilala natin kung sino siya. But then again, paano ko nga ba siya na-discover? Paano ko nakita ang kanyang article? So, yan. Medyo lakayan natin guys yung para mas lalo nyo ma-appreciate. So, yesterday, while I was like browsing sa Twitter, I came across dito sa isang retweet ayun dito kay Minister of Pre-Colonial Philippines. Happy birthday, Lenny. Yesterday was birthday ni Lenny Robredo. No? Na in-announce niya ang pagpapagawa niya ng coffee table na remembrance kung paano siya natalo noong 2022. Grabe, no? Ang tawag doon? Sadista ba yun? Masokista. Yung inaalala pa yung sakit ng kanyang pagkatalo. Mukha namang hindi. Kasi, di ba, gusto niya pa nga ng remembrance. Anyway, may you keep going forward for US imperialists. Yan. F-dog. Yan. Inano niya si Lenny Robredo. Bakit nga ba? There is this one article na babasahin natin, scrutinize natin yung mga sinabi ng writer dito na si Brian Berletic. Marami siyang mga sinabi dun sa kanyang article na talagang pasok na pasok sa banga. And na-publish niya to, I think, last year, May 25, 2022. Okay? Pero sino nga ba si Brian Berletic? Actually, isa siyang journalist or isa siyang writer na very much into geopolitics. So, tiningnan ko nga rito, sino nga ba siya? Ano nga ba siya? So, he's a US geopolitics analyst and debunker, former US Marine officer. Okay? So, ayan, siya ay kilala as Brian Joseph Thomas Berletic. Now, gusto niyo makita kung ano ba itsura ni Berletic, ito po siya. Ito po si Berletic. Yan, siya si Berletic, si Berletic. So, puti. Yan, Berletic. Livestream Taiwan, what's next? Let's talk China. Very interesting actually ang kanyang mga topic, yung mga sinasabi niya. He knows exactly what he's talking about. Surprisingly. US sells 400 Harpoon anti-ship missiles to Taiwan. Update on the Ukraine fighting. Very interesting ang kanyang mga sinasabi. Anyhow, punta natin guys itong article niya. I don't know kung nakikita niya, pero sige, zoom natin ng bahagya. Nakikita niya ba guys? Okay, ayun. So, from this article, from this tweet, hinanap ko to. Okay. So again, it was written last year, May 25, 2022. Magre-react lang tayo dito guys, Baka may magsabi na, kasi itong article na to, actually kasiraan to ni Lenny Robredo. Yan. West decries Philippines' new government, US-backed protest begin. US-backed protest begin. So, ibig sabihin, itong mga nangyayaring to is may kinalaman ng US. US-backed protest begin. Bakit nga ba? So, ayon nga sa kanya, recent general election in the Philippines appears that the island's nations continued but gradual move out from under US subordination, and it rises with the rest of Asia as China emerges as both a regional and global superpower. Guys, if you remember, nung panahon ni PRRD, ginagawa na ng paraan ni PRRD na tayo ay ma-detach sa US. Okay? Now, with Ferdinand, ito yung speculation niya at the time nung ginagawa niya to. So, ito yung dating para sa kanya. that Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. set to become the next president along with his running mate Sara Duterte, daughter of the outgoing president. The Western media appears convinced that it signals the continued building of relationship between the Philippines and China and the gradual diminishing of American influence over both the Philippines and the rest of the region. So ito yung fear nila. Kaya hindi nila bet si Bongbong Marcos. If you recall, no, nung panahon ni Bulaklak, FEM, maraming nagsasabi na yung pagpapatalsik sa kanya dahil sa tulong ng CIA. Reading this part of this article, dito ko mas lalong na solidify yung thought na oo nga no. So, if isa ka sa mga tao na dinedenounce mo or you're walking away from the American influence, they will definitely kick you out. Kasi pag binasa na natin yung buong article, doon natin marirealize may plano. Okay? The Southeast Asian nation of the Philippines. Pasensya na kayo guys ha. Medyo ako sa ng pagbabasa dahil sa medyo malabo siya para sa akin. The Southeast Asian nation of the Philippines has been strategic importance to the U.S. pursuit of primacy over Asia for decades. May interest. From 1898 to 1946, the Philippines was actually a colony of the United States, and since the nation gained its independence at the end of World War II, the U.S. has sought to maintain a military presence in the island nation as well as political control over it. Make sense? In the recent years, Philippine Rodrigo Duterte has seriously challenged attempts by U.S. to derail the nation's ties with China. China represents not only the Philippines' largest trader partner, but also an increasingly important infrastructure partner. With the U.S. in 2016 organized an arbitration at The Hague, rejecting China's claims over the South China Sea under the Nine-Dash Line. President Duterte refused to leverage it and instead work with China bilaterally. So, kaninong panahon yung The Hague? Kay Pinoy, di ba? Sino tumulong kay Cory Aquino na mapatalsik ang mga Marcoses, mga Amerikano, noong panahon ni Bulaklak, tama? And again, another Aquino working with the US. According to Sydney Morning Herald, in an article titled, "There is a new Marcos in Manila and he wanted a maritime deal with China." The incoming President Marcos will likely continue pursuing bilateral solutions rather than seek a confrontational underwritten by Washington. So basically, ang gusto ni US is to take a different course. Gusto nila ng gulo. Yun ba yun? The article notes Philippines is one of the several nations that have territorial disputes with Beijing in the South China Sea, but Marcos has foreshadowed an intention to pursue a maritime deal with Xi Jinping regime and set aside the International Tribunal ruling in The Hague that rejected China's sweeping claims to most of the contested waterway under its so-called Nine-Dash Line. That arbitration is no longer an arbitration if there's only one party, so it's no longer available to us, he said in January, adding that war is not an option and bilateral agreement is what we are left with. The article also noted that Marcos has insisted he would not turn to the U.S. in regards to the nation's relations with China. Policy analysts cited in the article would claim that regardless of the incoming Philippine government's stated policy, the U.S. and its partners, most notably Australia, would have to make sure that Marcos' regime will not lean too much in the Chinese orbit of influence. So gusto talaga nilang makialam. No? O talagang nakikialam sila. Hindi lang gusto, pero talagang nakikialam sila. Correct me if I'm wrong. Parang narinig, kanino ko ba narinig? I think if Prof. Contreras. hanggang ngayon colonized pa rin tayo because of our colonial mentality. Hanggang ngayon. Parang hindi naman yata colonial mentality lang. Parang hanggang ngayon talaga is ano tayo, colonized tayo. Parang hindi tayo maka-move na walang nakikialam sa atin na ibang bansa, 'di ba? Benner News admittedly funded by the US government through an annual grant from the United States Agency for Global Media or USAGM. In this article, Marcos seen as a pro-China. Robredo will likely test by Beijing ties. Would make it much clearer. And din dito, China would likely enjoy friendly ties with the Philippines if Ferdinand Marcos Jr. wins next week's presidential election, while his main challenger, Vice President Leni Robredo, has vowed to seek help in protecting the Philippine waters in the South China Sea, American analysts said. This insight was garnered from Benner's News interview with the likewise U.S. government funded Center for Strategic and International Studies, whose analyst Greg Polling claimed Marcos is the most pro Beijing of all candidates. He is the most pro Chinese in a system where most people are anti Chinese. He avoids the press and debates, and what we have are this of the cuff remarks that are pro Chinese. He is a friend of Chinese embassy, si PBBM. Marcos' opponent during the election was Leni Robredo. She served as the vice president of the Philippines with President Duterte. The Philippines who vote for president and vice president separately, allowing opposing politicians to serve side by side. The Better News article would claim regarding her position regarding China and the US. Polling said Robredo may not be ideologically pro-American. Take note of this part, guys. Or a cheerleader for the alliance, but she appears to be nationalist who could tap allies for help in the territorial road that has dragged on for years. She is pragmatic about the South China Sea. Uh, China is a threat and violates the rule of law in the South China Sea, Polling said, adding that there was a reason to believe that her victory would strengthen the Philippine-US alliance. So, we all know naman na during the campaign season, talaga nga namang voice out of very vocal si Leni Robredo tungkol sa issue ng South China Sea or ng WPS. And the way it sounds for these people, dahil galit kayo sa kaaway namin, friend tayo. 'Di ba? Manila is Washington's biggest ally in Southeast Asia, where an increasingly assertive China is encroaching on other claimant nations' exclusive economic zones in the disputed South China Sea. Banner's article attempts to suggest Robredo is not excessively pro-American, but her track record tells a different story. Ito na yung part na interesting, guys. So Robredo was Washington's candidate of choice. Okay, Robredo has previously worked for a legal organization funded through foreign governments and foundations, including the U.S. government via USAID. Okay? So, ito yun, guys. Ito yung madalas ng pinagmamalaki ni Leni Robredo na binabanggit niya. So, ito yung Siligan. Okay? Sentrong alternatibong lingap ng panligan. Actually, kausap ko si Coach Jared tungkol dito. So, sabi ko sa kanya, ngayon ko lang na-gets kung bakit ganyan na lang ang Ateneo sa kanya. Because Siligan was actually founded, no? Mga taga-Ateneo ang nag-establish nito. Actually, napakaganda ng programa nito kasi nagpo-provide sila ng legal aid. And based dito sa article na to, okay, Robredo landed a gig with Siligan an alternative legal support group began in Ateneo de Manila University and based in Bicol. We were like community organizers, she says, of their work. The team would trek to far-flung communities with little to no access to legal aid and provide paralegal help. Minsan naguguluhan ako kung ano ba paralegal. Anong difference ng paralegal at saka ng secretary, legal secretary? Sa pagkakalam ko guys, ang paralegal is actually someone who assists the lawyers, especially when it comes to what they call that, research and so on. Sabi ko, anong difference pala ng paralegal at saka ng legal secretary? Well, sabi nila, meron pa rin. She would spend a decade, no? Matagal siya. She would spend a decade at Siligan, an organization that has 4 years. 4 years directly and as part of a wider legal network receive funding. Okay. Receive funding from and has worked with the U.S. government in shaping and interfering in the Philippine sovereign institutions. Shaping and interfering. In 2008 USAID document, it would explain one ALG Saligan reportedly trained almost 500 paralegals to guide for farmers' land reform applications through Department of Agrarian Reform Administration process. The organization also played a key role in getting the Naga City government to institutionalize a People's Council, a permanent official advisor channel for NGO input into the functioning of the municipal service. I heard something about this People's Council, pero ngayon ko lang na-discover that through Saligan, kaya nagkaroon ng ganito. But the way I recall it, parang it was an initiative of Jesse Robredo. Okay? But this article, iba yung sinasabi nila. With the NGOs serving, kaya natin ulit guys. With NGOs serving as one of the major vectors. With the NGOs serving as one of U.S. major vectors for interfering in the internal politics affair of targeted nations, Siligan role in the creating council as advisory channels for NGO input means giving U.S. organization the ability to directly influence political decisions. Well, medyo vague to. Itong part na to. No? Medyo vague to. But alarming. So ano ba talaga yung purpose kung bakit niya tinayo ang Angat Buhay? Diba? In 2018, as Vice President Robredo would participate in a U.S. National Endowment of Democracy program, the Young Leaders for Good Governance Fellowship. Really? The U.S. government-funded program is meant to not only influence who takes leadership roles in the Philippine government, but also what sort of policies they create, essentially building a pro-American political cadres in the heart of the Philippine government. In an International Republic Institute article titled "Why is it important to have a local level citizen-centered governance in the Philippines?" It would note Robredo's role in meeting with participants. The fellows were particularly honored that Vice President of the Philippines, Leni Robredo, spoke at the graduation ceremony, graduation ceremony, Vice President Robredo addressed the importance of fostering good governance and crucial role these fellows play in the future of the Philippines. Very much, no? Yan yung lagi niya sinasabi, good governance. So, part talaga yun ng script nila in which they should innovate and search for better ways to solve problems, changing mindsets, take risks, and be successful politician without sacrificing their values. Ito yung ano nila, no? Yung kanilang salitaan nung panahon ng campaign. While the US accuses China of attempting to influence nations around the globe in contradiction to US interests simply through trade and infrastructure investment, one only has to imagine the reaction from Washington if it was China organizing the leadership programs to train and install into power its own political cadres. So, 'di ba, itong part na to hanggang dito sa dulo, very interesting yung sinasabi niya. But the thing is, anong ebidensya niya? Ano ang nagsusupport nitong mga claims na to? Paano paano siya? How did he came up with this? 'Di ba? The urgency of US Philippine military cooperation. So, andito na tayo guys sa EDCA. A recently published RAND Corporation paper titled The Ground-Based Intermediate Range Missiles in the Indo-Pacific, assessing the position of US allies, focuses in the necessity for the US to place intermediate range missiles within striking distance of China. These missiles, along with other military assets, are prerequisites for any conventional war waged by US against China. So, kailangan nila ng mga EDCA sites. So, it's really part, no? Kahit sino pa yung maging presidente, parte yon, no? Ng kanilang plano. Conventional war, it could have been easier kung si Leni Robredo. Unfortunately, it wasn't her na nanalo sa election. Conventional war, the US sees as absolutely necessary between now and as early as 2025 to prevent China from irreversible suppressing the US economy, economically and militarily. So talagang interest, no? It's more like the interest ni Amerika in tungkol dyan. Actually, meron nga akong nakitang isang video. It's an interview coming from Senator Amy Marcos. Na ang Amerika daw, hindi naman tutulong na maging insurgency-free ang Pilipinas. What was that? Hanapin ko yun. Ayan, I got it. Yeah, the paper mentions the Philippines specifically, claiming that the U.S. alliance with the Philippines is in a state of flux, while the Philippines public and elites generally supported the United States and the alliance itself. President Duterte has pursued policies that negatively affect ties, specifically since his election in 2016, has advocated closer ties with Beijing while concurrently pursuing policies that weaken core pillars of the U.S. Philippine alliance. Although Duterte has backtracked somewhat on the approach, leading to some improvements in the U.S. Philippine ties, as long as the future Philippine leader continue, according to opposition to the permanent U.S. military presence, the Philippines is extremely likely to accept the deployment of U.S. GBRIMs. Because U.S. strategy is in regards to encircling, containing, and potentially waging conventional war against China depends heavily on the proposition, these missiles, and other military assets along China's periphery, especially in regards to Taiwan. Securing the sufficient U.S. Military presence in the Philippines is crucial, but because such presence meant solely to threaten China would endanger Philippine-Chinese relationships, including significant economic ties, no rational government would do that. The formation of Marcos administration will go far in telling just how Philippine policy toward both China and the U.S. will unfold, but it is safe to say that that should the new government attempt build closer ties with China and refuse attempts by the U.S., to recruit it into a regional front against Beijing, the US will deploy all similar tools used to coerce or even overthrow the government in due time. So, ibig sabihin, pag si PBBM ay hindi umayon sa Amerika, gagawa at gagawa sila ng problema, no? Na mapatalsik siya. Very clear. This was written almost a year ago now. If the US is convinced already that the Marcos administration will not pivot towards anti-China policies, it may begin destabilizing efforts. This one is very, very important, guys. No? If the US is convinced already that the Marcos administration will not pivot toward anti-China policies, it may begin destabilizing efforts through extensive media, NGO, and political networks funded through NED. Even before his late June inauguration, such efforts would start. Nangyayari naman, guys, no? Come to think of it, such efforts would start with youth-led protests citing baseless claims of voter fraud. Such protests has already underway. It's true. Hanggang ngayon, ang mga kakamping hindi tinitigilan yung pandaraya daw. Okay? Na nangyari last 2022 election. NGO. The design is very kakamping. Di ba? Extensive media. Mainstream. Sino? Rappler, Inquirer, Manila Bulletin. Sino pa? Political networks, mga oppositions. Diba? Ano yung bagong establish ng mga pinklawans? Na NGO? Ang galing, di ba? Parte siya ng plano. Parte siya ng plano. Such efforts would start with the youth-led protest. Sino ba ang laging yung gulo? Yung nangyari sa UP. Yung may naalala nyo yung pagsisigaw ni what do you call that? Yung pagsisigaw ni Raulo Manuel? Na may kinalaman daw si PBBM sa pagkamatay ni Percy Lapid. Diba? The New York Times, in this article, Marcos win prompts protests in the Philippines, claim young voters who had rallied around Leni Robredo during the presidential race gathered to voice their frustration with the preliminary results showing her overwhelming defeat. And this article also claims that multiple election observers said they had received thousands of reports of election-related anomalies since the vote on Monday. Malfunctioning voting machines were one of the biggest concern, with Vote Report PH and Election Watchdog saying that the breakdowns had severely impaired the electoral process. And by the way, guys, sinabi niya rin, binuko niya rin dito that Vote Report PH is a conglomeration of US, Western and Allied funded organization. UP Internet Freedom Network, for example, admits on its website to being funded by a Taiwan government-funded Double Think Lab, as well as the Western government-funded Civicus Network. It is only one of the many US-funded networks eagerly supporting the current protest. Imagine nyo, Kaya pala ganyan kalakas sa mga dilawan, mga kakamping. Amerika pala ang backer nila. Kung totoo man to lahat ng sinasabi na to, na nagsusulat na to. It is clear Washington sought a different electoral outcome and will use the now familiar tools as US-sponsored color. US-sponsored color revolution to coerce the incoming government to sabotage its ties with China and militarize itself as yet another US proxy. Failing that, the US would seek to overthrow and replace this government with one more to Washington's liking. We have to be very careful. Kung totoo man to guys na sinasabing to, we really have to be very careful. Only time will tell how long these recent protests last and whether or not the Philippines can manage this balancing act with grace, securing socioeconomic stability and exploiting the many opportunities offered by China's regional and global rise. Or if through U.S. Interference, the Marcos administration is tripped up, landing the Philippines into an internal chaos and the very least denying the nation as a partner for China. Grabe. I seriously don't know what to say. I'm not sure kung di-discuss to ni Coach Jared sa isa sa kanyang mga lives, hopefully. And yeah, si Brian Berletic is a Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher and writer, especially for the online magazine New Eastern Outlook. So again, guys, ito nga po si Brian Berletic. Napaka-interesting ng kanyang sinulat. Obviously, hindi po siya Pilipino para atakihin si Robredo. So I can see how impartial he is. Talaga namang siya ay nagsasalita lang based sa kanyang research. 'Di ba? May in-enclose pa siyang mga diyan, mga part ng mga articles. We really have to look into this story, no? Gusto kong i-forward to kay Senator Amy Marcos through Daryl Yap, to Direct Daryl Yap. By the way, guys, ito yung sinasabi kong interview ni panoorin natin.
Ang umaako ng lahat ng gastos ng lugar, ba't naman hindi tayo kikilalanin bilang may-ari at magbayad ng upa, magbayad ng gastos, magbayad ng personnel? Tayo ang umaako ng lahat ng gastos nila, wala ng upa, libre na, higit sa lahat, yung kanilang kuryente, tubig, pati yung mga additional officers, lahat bayad ng Pilipinas. Nakakalito naman to kasi tinatanong ko lang yung mga points of information at nagulat din ako kung bakit nahihirapan sumagot yung iba nating mga opisyal. Samantalang ang pagkaintindi ko, nilistahan na ng 4 na karagdagan na kampo dito sa EDCA natin. Lahat naman tayo gusto natin ipagtibay ang ating sandatahan lakas. We want a stronger AFP and also we want a reliable military presence of the United States still in the Philippines. Nagulat ako kasi may listahan na sila ng pupuntahan ng mga Amerikano bilang sites, pero malabo lahat. Parang malabo kung bakit napili yung mga lugar na yon. Wala naman sa Bicol, wala naman sa Region 8 kung saan talagang maraming disaster. Nagulat naman kami doon. Pagkatapos, hindi rin maliwanag yung pagpili at kung talagang meron interoperability, modernization, yung capacity building, talaga bang titibay ang mga Pilipinong sundalo kapag ginawa natin to? Kasi kung babasahin mo ng maigi, yung papatayo lang ng mga Amerikano, mga bodega, nalalagyan nila ng mga armas na hindi tayo makakalapit. Nakakatakot din yun kasi kung yun mga armas para gamitin laban sa Taiwan na wala naman tayong kaaway-away, baka masangkot tayo sa gera na hindi naman atin. So yun ang ating tinatanong, inaalam kung paano ba yan. Pagkatapos, meron rin yung balikatan, yung mga issues ng balikatan, nanalito rin kami, pagkat walang listahan, 500 exercises, mas marami pa sa araw sa isang taon. Tapos, unlimited access ng mga Amerikano sa Pilipinas, 17.
Very interesting, di ba? Buti pa to si Senator Amy Si Senator Amy Marcos, no? Yung observation niya, grabe, no? Ang kumaka-scrutinize siya, sobra. Ito yung senador na nagtatrabaho. Hindi kailangan magsisigaw. no? Para talaga sa best interest ng mga Pilipino. Imagine niyo, tama ba yung pagkakarinig? Ako lang ba nakarinig o kayo rin, di ba? Tama ba yung sinabi niya? Libre. Walang renta, tapos tayo pa magbabayad ng mga pakuryente at kung ano-ano pa. Talaga? Ayos ah. So ito yung mapapala natin sa EDCA. Yung gagastos ng Pilipinas. Diba? Sabi yun ni Senator Amy Marcos. Masarap pag-usapan. Masarap pa, wala kasi tayong direct access kay Sen Amy, no? Pero kung I might throw some questions through Direct Daryl Yap. Let's see kung lalapitan natin si Direct Daryl dyan. But nevertheless, it's a very important na we came across this article. Kasi really, whatever it is that this article is saying, medyo alarming siya para sa akin. So really, I mean, this administration, this government, should really see this. Kung totoo man to. This is a fair warning na ito yung planong gawin ng mga tao. Come to think of it, para sa akin, pag kayo tatanungin ko guys, i-comment nyo lang yan, anong matatawag nyo kay Leni Robredo? Nobody gave a damn tungkol dito sa article na to. Sabagay, hindi naman lahat ng tao magkakaroon ng interes eh. But this very article is actually a warning na may mga tao na gustong pabagsakin ng administrasyon ni PBBM kung magiging anti-America siya. Kaya naman pala si Leni Robredo laging nasa Amerika. Diba? Now it makes more sense. Sabi ko nga kay Coach Jared kaya naman pala binigyan si Leni Robredo ng honorary degree ng Ateneo. Kasi matagal na silang nagtatrabaho. Matagal na silang nagsasama. Diba? Pero, kung gumagawa man sila ng paraan, kung sino man, I'm not pointing my finger to one particular person, one particular group, o kung sino man. Nakakayang isipin na sa panahon na to, pinakikilamanan pa rin ang Pilipinas. Pinakikilamanan pa rin ang nagiging administrasyon ng mga presidente natin. Na dapat hanggang ngayon, hawak pa rin tayo sa leeg ng ibang lahi. Diba? I-share ko to kay Ma'am Len Silvestre. Yan, mga kaibigan natin yan sa Amerika. Mga tunay na nagmamahal kay PBBM. Isa sa mga number 1 supporter ni PBBM yan sa New Jersey area. Anyway guys, I honestly don't know what to say. Dito pa lang, kitang-kita ko na ang pagkatao ni Leni Robredo. I don't know exactly kung ano yung mga tamang words na gagamitin sa kanya. Kayo na makakapagsabi. NGO. Balikan natin yan. Media. If the US is convinced already that Marcos administration will not pivot toward anti-China, so ibig sabihin, pag hindi natin pag naging kaaway natin ng China, it might begin destabilizing efforts through extensive media, NGO, and political networks funded by NED. Even before this late June inauguration. Guys, tandaan nyo, itong article na to, it was written last year, May 25th, 2022. And lahat ng ito nangyayari. Naalala niyo yung pagpunta ni PBBM sa China? Tapos nagpunta bigla rito si US Vice President Kamala Harris. Hindi nila gusto na maging kaibigan ng Pilipinas ang China. At pag nangyari yon, gaya ng sinabi nila, just like what they did with the senior, no, kay Apo Lakay, they might be doing the same thing kay PBBM. Anyway guys, again, maraming salamat sa pag-tune in. Oh my God, paaba yung ating rito. Nevertheless, this is somewhat like a warning for all of us. I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys.